There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. We're here today with Adam Goyette. He is the VP of Demand Generation at G2 Crowd. Adam, how's it going today, man?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Logan?
I'm doing really well. Adam, thanks for coming on the show today. We appreciate you starting your week with us. It may not be Monday when you listen to this, but Adam, appreciate you taking some time out of your Monday to be on the show with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, Adam, we're going to be talking about 4 ways that you have in mind that marketing leaders can help drive alignment with their sales counterparts within their organization today. Before we jump into that, I would love for you to share with the audience what you and the team at G2 Crowd are up to these days.
Yeah, definitely. So I head up demand gen at G2 Crowd. So responsible for kind of all our different growth channels. For those of you who don't know, G2 Crowd is bringing kind of transparency to the B2B buying process. We will soon cross over the 500,000 reviews of B2B software. So pretty exciting times to be at the company. And we're doing a lot of cool stuff with kind of intent data, a lot of different things we're doing for the sales and marketing side. And, prior to that, I worked at a couple different, high growth startups in New York City, Fieldlands and Booker. And most recently, I was at a company called Thrive, where I had the growth marketing team there, but also along the way ended up kind of managing the inbound sales team that grew to about 40 people. And, in about 2 years' time, we went from bringing in about 30% of all the new sales at the company, despite making up only about 3% of the sales force.
Wow.
So working with a lot of experience past, and then obviously managing a sales team is a whole different kind of ball of wax, but it definitely got me a lot closer, I think, to kind of understanding the alignment and what goes into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I love what we're going to talk about here today. Obviously, we could talk sales and marketing alignment on the show all day long, and I think we'd continue to have things to talk about. But specifically with your background and some of those previous positions that you've had, I think you have some practical advice to give to our audience, Adam. So I appreciate you coming on. Before we get into some of the things that you think teams could really put into place to drive sales and marketing alignment, you mentioned as we were coming up with the topic for this interview, an aha moment that, at the time, the CFO of your team called embarrassing. So tell us a little bit about that situation, how it played out, and what it taught you about sales and marketing alignment.
Yeah, it was early in my career. So we had just kind of come off a bad sales month, right? And it was a typical sales and marketing meeting, and we had our senior leadership there, and the meeting dissolved into basically a lot of finger pointing about, is it marketing's fault? It's these leads we're getting. It's the sales side, they're not doing enough. But nobody had any real data to kind of back it up, right? It was a lot of back and forth and just, like I said, like finger pointing. And so at the end of it, our CFO, who was sitting in the meeting, literally called it embarrassing. He sent an email to a couple of us and said, I don't ever want to sit in a meeting like that again. You guys own the same goal, and the same goal is sales, and none of you can come to this meeting and not know what's happening, right? And so I think I kind of went home that night, and nobody likes sitting in a meeting and getting reamed out and saying, that's embarrassing. So pre having kids, I literally stayed up till about 4 a.m. that night figuring out all the different funnels that we had going. What was our average sales touches we were having? What were the emails we were sending? What was performing better? And then, I didn't get it up to 100% by that time, but really the next day I kind of went into his office and said, like, here's what I think is the problem, right? And it wasn't, if someone was pointing at marketing and someone was pointing at sales. And I think it was having like an honest look of like what is working and what's not working across the board. So since that point, it really kind of opened my eyes of, I think, how I should have been looking at things. And I was an individual contributor at the time. I wasn't running demand gen. I was running the email marketing programs. It was definitely kind of out of my wheelhouse, but I think it was, I just spent a lot of time just figured it out.
Yeah. I think that had to be pretty instrumental in your career. And that was going to be my question was, were you leading that team? What was your position at that time, being an individual contributor and kind of taking the initiative to look at all of the data and kind of digest it, take it to leadership and see what could come of it other than just some finger pointing. I think, kudos to you for taking that step. And, that and other experiences have kind of led you to these keys to sales and marketing alignment. You touched on a little bit in sharing that story there, Adam, of owning the outcome. So tell us a little bit about what that means to own the outcome from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a common thing you hear a lot, but I don't think it's really put into practice, right? MQLs aren't the goal. Driving more leads to sales is not the goal. Or, the goal is to get sales from the marketing side as well, right? And so I think aligning yourself with contracts as your kind of North Star and how you're influencing that is really, I think, sets the stage for how your marketing team kind of operates, right? There's that saying out there. I think it's, I think I heard Joe Chernoff say it, but I don't think he invented it. But it's, it's just show me how you measure me, and I'll tell you how I'll behave, right? And so I think often, like, we end up in a world where, we want demand gen people to, drive leads, and we measure trade show people off of how many people and how many, business cards get dropped in a fishbowl. When the reality is, right, that's not driving the business. The business is being driven by the sales that are being generated out of that. That's a leading indicator, right, of success possibly. But too often, I think, marketers just kind of view their end of the line if you run trade shows as, hey, I got 1,000 leads and we gave away these iPads and we had really cool looking booth. And when you go back to them and say, well, how many sales did it generate? How did it influence pipeline? A lot of times they can't answer that question for you. And I think it's about not just as the leader really owning the outcome, but your individual team member should really be completely focused around that. And I think it's setting them up for aligning with sales, but also just kind of future in their career, right? Because I think if you're going to be a leader in whatever it is you're doing, you need to understand like how it's impacting the business.
Today's growth story is all about search engine marketing. The company we're highlighting is SentinelOne. This challenger cybersecurity brand was set out to disrupt the endpoint protection space. Their brand was top-notch, their product was innovative, but they were struggling to gain traction online in an already developed industry. Then they found Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency. Within the first quarter of working with Directive, SentinelOne was able to increase their organic traffic by 128% and overall lead volume by an outstanding 251%. Now, I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
Yeah. I think, the analogy that comes to mind for me is, you're running a relay race and the end of the race, handing off the baton isn't the end of that race. The end of the race is when, your entire team, that last runner in the race, crosses the finish line, and having that as your mindset from the end, even if, you're passing off the baton, still looking at the whole team effort is to win the race, not just for me to get my baton, handed off to the next runner. So this other key that you were talking about, Adam, is, an ownership mindset. So once you start thinking about, owning the outcome, what are your thoughts on how marketers can develop this ownership mindset that's going to help them, look at the end goal of revenue growth alongside their sales counterparts?
Yeah, I think for a lot of marketers, it's probably a little bit of a daunting task, right? It's like, well, I don't really know what happens after the leads get passed over to sales, and they don't feel comfortable going over to the salesperson maybe and asking them, like, without it sounding accusatory, like, what do you do after I give you these leads? Like, what is your process like,
right.
But you have to dig in and you have to be kind of curious and want to understand, like, what is the process, right? Like when I do a trade show or I run a demand gen program or a webinar and people inbound off of that, like what happens after that, right? What are the emails that are being sent, right? And if you're the one running trade shows, like you don't own all those pieces, but you need to understand what's happening with all those pieces so you can say like, well, does that make sense, right? Because a lot of times people end up in their bubbles, and we don't have that kind of ownership mindset, right? It's very easy for the person running the trade show to be operating one way, and then the follow-up emails going out from your email marketer are happening one way because they're just looking at that piece, and then the sales cadence is its own thing, right? And nobody's taking a step back to say like, let's just work throughout the entire flow. And I think it's really on the person who kind of is at the front of that, right? And so whatever the channel is, I think it's that mindset of like, you don't control everything in that funnel, but I think it's really, you need to understand what happens there and make suggestions and improvements. And you got to dig into areas you're probably not that comfortable in doing so, right? Like how many kind of, social media people out there have had a lot of experience sitting on sales calls and listening and understanding what's happening, right? My guess would be probably not a lot, but I think it's really critical to kind of break through and understanding the full funnel of what you're doing.
Yeah. What are some of the things you or some of the people on your team, Adam, have done to get themselves in those uncomfortable situations that open their eyes to, more of the funnel than what they're typically responsible for?
Yeah, I think a couple big things. I think one is kind of marketing aligning around kind of the one goal, right? And so our big goal that we're trying to drive, right, is pipeline and marketing source revenue is ultimately what we want. And there is a marketing influence kind of metric we're going, but when we do goal setting stuff, it's tied around that North Star, and we break it down to, if you're a trade show marketer or you're a social media person, here's your individual piece of that goal. And so that's one way I think it helps keep everyone aligned. And then really, I think it's the cross collaboration within the marketing team. It gets you part of the way there, but then I encourage everyone, my marketing team, to really spend a lot of time listening to sales calls, listening to onboarding calls, right? Putting yourself in the end user experience to go through the full funnel. So I think that really helps, I think, understanding other people's process and aligning what their decisions they're making with how it kind of flows throughout the whole thing. So it's great for me to say those things, and think that that's the reality, but it really comes down to the individual, right? I think a piece of it is you have to have kind of an intellectual curiosity to want to know what's happening throughout the whole process. And I think it's about hiring the right people who kind of have that mindset, right? They're not just happy, throwing leads over their shoulder and walking away.
So you also mentioned, as we were chatting offline, Adam, in your recommendation for marketers to come up with goals that align with the outcome, getting away from fluffy marketing goals. As you mentioned, there might be, indicators further up funnel of how many visitors is a booth and things like that. What advice do you have folks around, developing those goals that align with the outcome? Sounds like you guys are putting some of that into practice yourselves internally.
Yep. Yeah, we're definitely putting a lot of that into practice and really kind of establishing it. I think the biggest thing for people looking, if you're a leader of a team, I think is, you shouldn't allow kind of goals, I think, that don't align with the end outcome of what you're trying to achieve. So I think you should be giving everyone a very solid outcome of something that can't just be gamed too. Because I mentioned, like, how easy is it to get, fish, business cards in a fishbowl, right? And say like, right. Oh, we drove all these, everyone, they stamp them well and pass them over, and the sales team sitting there like, what? This person doesn't remember coming by the booth, right? And so I think when you align to the end outcome, a couple of things happen. One is you get completely focused on hitting the end outcome, right? So you're not going to do things that don't contribute to that. And then two, your end outcome is aligned with sales, right? So like ultimately you're going to be working to give them the best. You're not going to care about just doing volume and hitting a certain point. So if you're leading the team, I think making sure everyone is kind of has their North Star metric that aligns with sales and contracts. And then I also think, if you're an individual, and you don't have that goal, I think it's really up to you to kind of set it for yourself and bring it up to your manager. Like, hey, like, it doesn't make sense for us to just be measuring, Facebook as how many followers do we have, right? For a lot of reasons, but one of them is like that doesn't really align with like the end outcome. Like what's a better metric we can have that discussion, right? Because I think sometimes people don't understand like the different channels of how it actually impacts, the end result of a sale, which is why everyone is ultimately there, right? You're in it to make money and for the company and do a lot of cool things along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Adam, I really appreciate this conversation. I think we've hit on some things that really can help a lot of marketing folks out there that are trying to, work in closer collaboration with their sales counterparts. As I mentioned, I think, sales and marketing alignment is something that seems so easy on paper, but it's very tough in, a lot of different organizations and a lot of different environments to really get it right. So if anybody listening to this would like to stay connected with you, would like to ask any follow-up questions on this topic, or just reach out to you on any point, what would be the best way for them to go about doing that, man?
Yeah, best way I think to reach out to me would be probably on LinkedIn. And, you can shoot me a message there. I'm pretty quick to respond and we can connect. So, Adam Goyette should be pretty easy to find. So yeah, if you don't know how to use LinkedIn, you're probably not listening to this podcast.
I think that's the best wrap up we've had in a while, Adam. That is great, man. We will make it super easy. We will put a link to Adam's LinkedIn profile in the episode show notes for this show. We really appreciate you being on the show. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, thank you very much, Logan. I enjoyed it.
Becoming a thought leader doesn't just happen. If you want to build a strong personal brand and extend your reach online and offline, you need a plan. Want help developing yours? Check out Impact Summit. This one-day event is bringing together best-selling authors, professional athletes, influential CEOs, and emerging entrepreneurs, all for one purpose: to equip you to lead, influence, and inspire. Whether you're looking to build a lasting legacy with your business or extend the reach of your brand, Impact Summit speakers will share inspiring stories and practical lessons to help you on your way. Did we mention a session on launching and growing a podcast? You guessed it. You'll hear from Sweetfish Media's own James Carberry during that session. You won't want to miss all of these influencers and leaders coming together in Salt Lake City on October 13th. Ready to learn more? Check out influencerinc.co/Impact Summit. B2B Growth listeners can get 15% off the price of their tickets for this event by using the promo code SWEETFISH, SWEETFISH. So use that code, get your tickets today, and get ready to grow your brand and your influence at Impact Summit 2018.